This is another iRaw podcast. We podcast to make the world a better place for animals.
Welcome back to Season 5 of the Animal Highlights, where we're focused on animals and politics. All the content from this season has been extracted from Season 6 of the Animal Turn podcast, which is a season of the same name, Animals and Politics. This season, my co-host will be Virginia Thomas, who's an environmental social scientist. She was previously also a research fellow with the Wellcome Trust-funded project From Feed the Birds to Do Not Feed the Animals. In this episode, we speak about P.L.E, a specific hawk in New York City who became famous after controversy erupted around his setting up a nest. Hi, Virginia. Welcome back to the Animal Highlight.
Hi, good to be back here. Thank you.
I know that you've got a really interesting animal for us to speak about today, so I'm looking forward to jumping into it.
I really enjoyed writing this one, or thinking about this one. It's a red-tailed hawk called P.L.E, and I found out about it actually from reading Hal Herzog's book, Some We Love, Some We Eat, Some We Hate. I've probably got those in the wrong order, but that's what we're talking about. So I shall get started. In this episode of The Animal Turn, Steve Cook was saying that people should recognise animals as individuals worthy of concern for their own sake. This is important to upholding their rights rather than simply thinking of them as members of groups or species worthy of concern. When we recognise animals as individual beings who matter for their own sake, we recognise that they can and indeed should have rights, including habitat rights. Your conversation with Steve got me thinking about a red-tailed hawk in New York City known as P.L.E. P.L.E. has an interesting story. He was recognised in the city as an individual worthy of concern and who had a claim to his urban space. Before telling you about P.L.E, let me tell you a little bit about red-tailed hawks. Red-tailed hawks are one of the largest and commonest birds of prey in North America. They're somewhere between the size of a crow and a goose, weighing between 1 and 1.5 kilograms, and with a wingspan of over a metre. They have a really distinctive, long, rasping call, and films often mistakenly use this when they're showing bald eagles. Red-tailed hawks are generalists and opportunists, and this makes them capable of adapting to almost any habitat, which is why these apex predators can thrive in urban settings. P.L.E did exactly that in New York City. P.L.E, so named for his light colouring, was first seen as a young hawk in Central Park in 1991, and he went about setting up a nest on the ledge of a fancy apartment building that bordered the park. His distinctive colouring and his choice of nest site made him easily recognisable to the human inhabitants of the city. Interest in P.L.E started with the bird enthusiasts who watched him, the other red-tailed hawks, and the other birds in and near Central Park. But because of the unusual location of his nest, interest in P.L.E spread beyond dedicated bird watchers, and other people in the city started to pay attention to him, taking interest in him as an individual, as P.L.E, not as a red-tailed hawk. We don't often practice this kind of individualisation with wild or liminal animals. People might have thought of P.L.E as just another one of the red-tailed hawks and other birds who live in Central Park, or they might just have thought of him as a red-tailed hawk more generally. But they didn't. They thought of him as P.L.E. And P.L.E became something of a celebrity. He was the subject of hundreds of newspaper articles, 3 books, and an award-winning documentary called The Legend of P.L.E.
P.L.E, he has become the most famous hawk in the world. There she comes.
A lot of this interest was because of where P.L.E had built his nest. It wasn't just that he'd built his nest on an apartment building rather than in a tree in Central Park. The apartment building he'd chosen was on the Upper East Side, some of New York's most expensive real estate. And the building, like many others, was covered in anti-bird spikes, which were intended to stop birds roosting and nesting on them. As P.L.E proved, this kind of hostile architecture doesn't necessarily work. In fact, other birds have even started building their nests from anti-bird spikes. At first, people left P.L.E.'s nest alone, but in 2004, it and the anti-bird spikes, which had accommodated rather than deterred it, were removed.
Pale Male, the Fifth Avenue hawk, lost his home today when the co-op of his building destroyed his nest.
Perhaps because people had recognised Pale Male as an individual, they were intensely concerned for his welfare. Residents of the building and New Yorkers generally rallied in protest at the removal, calling it heartless and demanding that the nest be reinstated.
I can't imagine what went through their minds. Certainly nothing went through their hearts.
They're our birds. We should look after them. It's America.
And this brings us really well to what Steve was saying in your conversation. Steve suggests that both humans and animals need to have their interests respected to live a good life. And if animals need habitats to live a good life, then they should have rights to those habitats. Pale Male needed his nest to live a good life, to fulfill his potential to hatch and rear chicks. Red-tailed hawks like Pale Male use the same nest with the same partner for many years. Red-tailed hawks have impressive courtship rituals, which involve the male flying high and then plummeting down to the female. Sometimes the pair of birds will lock talons in midair and spiral towards the ground before pulling up and then perching to preen each other. So when his nest was removed, Pale Male's ability or his right to raise chicks was violated. And because we can think of his nest as his property, we could also say that his property rights had been violated. He had habitat rights and property rights, even if his habitat was somewhere different from what we might expect, and even if his property was somewhat different from what we might expect. In response to the protests, and rather ironically, the anti-bird spikes that had enabled Pale Male to build his nest in the first place were reinstalled. He and his mate Lola quickly rebuilt their nests. Unfortunately, though, the pair were unsuccessful in hatching eggs. One theory is that the way the new nest was built around and among the new anti-bird spikes might have prevented the hawks from being able to turn their eggs during the incubation period, meaning that the chicks didn't grow to hatch. It's not certain that this was the case, but that's the theory, and some of the spikes were removed. Sadly, despite this, Pale Male and Lola never succeeded in hatching any eggs together after their original nest was removed. After Lola's death in 2010, however, Pale Male found new mates and did successfully hatch chicks in the rebuilt nest, fathering over 30 chicks during his lifetime.
Pale Male for Father's Day!
2 babies have been sighted in the nest.
When he died in 2023, Pale Male was thought to be 33. This is very old for a red-tailed hawk. The average lifespan of wild red-tailed hawks is 6 or 7, although others have been recorded as living into their late 20s. Over the course of his long life, Pale Male captured the imagination of New Yorkers and made them think seriously about how humans can live alongside other species in cities. Most recent data suggests that there are about 15 pairs of red-tailed hawks nesting in Manhattan, and the population continues to grow.
What do you think? Do you think Pale Male did live to be 33? I know that this is a bone of some contention.
Oh yeah, this is something that I didn't actually manage to fit in there, but people are surprised that this one bird could have lived so long. I mean, it's not impossible, but it is unlikely. So they think maybe what happened was there was actually more than one hawk who had the same distinctive colouring, who kept using, also more than one hawk were using the same nest, and people just assumed it was the same hawk all along. I mean, I like to think it was one bird. And I think that's what people like to think. We like to believe in this one bird coming to the same nest and living a really long time and forming a relationship with people, or people forming a relationship with it, or him rather.
Yeah, but it is still, I think, important to, there's a tendency, I think, when we think about like animals as these monolithic groups or as collectives, we kind of neglect the fact that there are individuals who experience very specific things. But it's interesting though, because I think somehow we're able to privilege the individual's experience while at the same time like disavowing the collective. Do you know what I mean? Like, so everyone's concerned with Pale Male, but what about all the other red-tailed hawks? Do you know if this kind of interest in Pale Male led to other kind of conservation efforts or anything in Manhattan? Like, was there any kind of direct link between his story and kind of more appreciation for birds of prey in the city?
Oh, that I'm not sure about. just pure speculation. It wouldn't surprise me, because that is something that can happen when you raise awareness as an individual. It can lead to concern for the species as a whole. That's why in conservation, ambassador animals are so important. There's the kakapo in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is a really endangered nocturnal flightless parrot. And there's a bird called sirocco who is an absolute dead loss for the conservation breeding program, but he's such a cool bird that he's a really important ambassador for the species, and people care so much. I mean, they care about the kakapo generally, but sirocco is such a cool bird that he really helps people care about the kakapo.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to think about. Anyway, that was really interesting. I didn't know about pale male before you started speaking about him, and I just know that New York has some of the highest, I think it's also peregrine falcons, one of the highest populations of peregrine falcons. Don't quote me on that, and I say this far too often on the podcast, but I'm pretty certain. I saw a peregrine falcon up in Kingston, actually, while studying. I was sitting at my desk, and all of a sudden, I realized out of the corner of my eye, something was there, and I look up, and there's a peregrine falcon just like standing, staring at me. I was like, oh, well, there you go. But yeah, I think peregrine falcons do exceedingly well in cities. A lot of birds of prey are finding a way, right?
They do. This is the interesting thing. Our urban areas are actually providing really good niches for some raptors. Like peregrines nest on cliffs often, so things like cathedrals and churches are basically man-made cliffs and full of pigeons who are also using them as homes. So it's just really easy for the peregrine falcons to move in, have somewhere really good to live, and a really good source of prey in the pigeons, poor old pigeons.
That's fascinating. All right. Well, thank you so much, Virginia, for joining me again on the Animal Highlight.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much to Virginia Thomas for being an incredible co-host, and to Rebecca Shen for her work on the logo and all the artwork done with the Animal Highlight. The show was edited and produced by myself. This is The Animal Highlight with me, Claudia Hirtenfelder.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.